Something I've heard, and perhaps you've heard this line too, that video games are just for little kids. For some of us, this doesn't bother us, and for others, we can list 1.5 million reasons why that's wrong. But why do people think this? And how true could it be? Much of why people thought video games were just for little kids began back in the 1970s and 80s, during both the rise of the arcade, and just a few generations later, game consoles. Back in those days, there was a cultural stigma different from what many people face now. An expression I would like to use was back in those days, it was a jock's time, where sports and physical activities were the standard. If you did watch any movies back from those days, you would always see the gamer as just a silent geek. You can combine that with the cartoonish persona images associated with many early games like Mario and Donkey Kong, and you'll find yourself in a bit of a cultural war. Something akin to a geek mindset versus the abilities and thinking of a jock. But in the end, who actually won between these two? If you have been growing up in the 21st century, you've been growing up in a world in which the geeks have actually won, where most of the social stigma against nerdist ideas and lifestyles have become more and more of the norm. It is here where you find professionals who play video games for days for their fans, where you find gaming competitions that draw in more viewers than most normal sports games, where there are a countless number of gaming and comic conventions throughout all years at the time that gather hundreds, if not thousands, of people to come in and see what they have. Yet, you'll still find avid people saying video games are just for kids. Why is this still persisted? A lot of people who still think video games are just for kids grew up during the birth of video games, back when games were mainly meant for younger audiences. But as games evolved and grew to adopt more and more mature elements and ideas, they never bothered to update their information. Rather than seeing games as they are now, they can only recognize them as the childish precursors that they grew up with. Before we had the ESRB to rate games for the correct audience, it was a much bigger free-for-all for what was marketable to children. This resulted in groups of parents and politicians lobbying to try and change the rules of the gaming market and to protect younger children with this content. Fast forward today, and these groups still exist and still go after games despite changes are being made to lock younger kids out of games like GTA and Call of Duty, another holdout from a bygone age. As esports gained in popularity, it was only a matter of time before they would be watched on television, in this case ESPN. While some were pleased by this, others weren't. One famous case was a sportscaster by the name of Colin Cowherd.
The X-Ard player celebrated one round too early and ended up losing a match in heartbreaking fashion. So these are two guys playing video games and a crowd of people watching two guys play video games. Here's the moment. This is going to become a league with playoffs and teams and cities and nerds everywhere. Here's the moment.
And the dead angle doesn't bait it. Gets caught low again, has to burst immediately.
Full meter though, full meter! He's gonna have to do, oh he can't, no burst!
So
no
smart!
Burst. Oh my
so
God!
Smart!
Genius!
So smart, he couldn't burst because of the super. But Washiga thinks it's over!
Locked down,
He won the last round! And the Bella doesn't care! He's still got 65%!
Charming guy, isn't he? Well, at least he left the network to do as he promised. Maybe wish him well as he sells bait. I have no doubts there are countless people like him who have been angered they've lost this little culture war. Still, the question needs to be answered. Are games for kids? No. Countless times it's been shown that both games and gamers consist of both mature and young audiences. And with the years piling onto the game industry, it has matured to attract both groups of people. Be it through a more mature story, the world you play, or the types of things you can do, there's never been a bigger appeal to make more mature games. When someone says that video games are for kids, you can just point to games like Spec Ops The Line and Bioshock and say these games were meant for mature audiences and hold themes that only mature audiences could understand. And if they're still adamant that they are right, well, they have to be kinda dumb.